Welcome to Bible Study Time and welcome to my Quiet Time Bible Study. This is the time where I invite you to come and join me in the comfort of my prayer room where I share topics and discussion about this Holy Hebrew Bible in front of me and just information that I've gathered during my quiet time with the Most High. And who am I talking about? I'm talking about the creator of the universe. And of course, today we have my companion, my beautiful fluffy companion here. She's not a stuffy, this is my companion. And she tends to make an appearance from time to time. I want to thank you all for subscribing and for liking the videos. So today, before we delve into some heavier topics of Bible study, I wanted to do a book review. And today I'm going to do a mini book review about this book here. This is the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch, the prophet. And this is book 1 of the Book of Enoch, the only Book of Enoch that at this time I feel, based on my extensive research, has been divinely inspired. And the copy of it that I have here is the one by R.H. Charles. Okay, so today I am going to share a historical review of the Book of Enoch, also known as the first Book of Enoch, along with some research and thoughts that I have gathered. As many of you may already know, I do believe that the first Book of Enoch is divinely inspired, and I do have a Bible study series about it on this channel. I believe it's called The Sons of God. Who are the sons of God? Now, historically, scholars have been debating whether or not book 1 of the Book of Enoch should have been included in the 66 book canon, which is this Bible in front of me. This is the standard Bible that typical Christians and believers in the Most High, Creator, God of the universe, read. But actually, when you look at research, you'll notice that historically the 1611 King James Bible actually had 80 books in it. And then there are some other books that I will be researching, some other Bibles such as the Sefer Bible that have, I believe, 88 books in them. Right, so a lot of those books are considered extra canonical books or pseudepigraphal books, right? Now, even though I believe that this Book of Enoch, book 1, is the inspired word of the Most High Creator God, and even though the disciples and our Savior, Yeshua Christ, did read it, I actually don't think it should have been actually included in, the Bible. I don't think that it should have been included. And I'll tell you why. Because the Book of Enoch itself states that it is written for the day of tribulation. It says that Enoch saw these things not for this generation, but for a remote one, which is for to come. And that's a quote. And so that's why I want to talk about it. There are actually amazing gems of truth in this document, this book, that we, as the body of Christ, can use to kind of like navigate through these end times and, understand what's going on in the world. A lot of things that organized religion doesn't seem to address, right? As I previously mentioned, many scholars debated this book's authenticity, and even some who translated it from the Greek into English were kind of like unsure about whether or not it was authentic. But the discovery of the texts from the Qumran caves and the Dead Sea Scrolls, I believe it was Qumran Cave number 4. So those discoveries provided parts of the original copy of the Book of Enoch, parts of it, right? Fragments of it, right? Parts of the Aramaic original, shutting the mouths of many naysayers. Okay, so what I wanted to do today is I just want to briefly go into like this mini sort of introduction particularly for those of you who are new, right? And the actual author, R.H. Charles, in the beginning of this book, they have a pretty good historical accurate description about the book. And so what I thought I would do is I would just read it from here, because it's very concise, and it kind of captures a lot of the research that I've gathered. So I'm just going to read from the introduction of this book. I'm not actually reading from the Book of Enoch. I'm just sort of reading from the introduction, so that some of you who are new may know what I'm speaking about here. So in the introduction it says, Enoch is recorded in the book of Genesis, right? He walked with God, and he was not, for God took him, and took him while he still lived. For Paul, who was himself taken up to the third heaven, explains in his letter to the Hebrews that by faith Enoch was translated, that he should not see death. And he was not found, because God translated him. This entry into the divine presence may have lacked the drama of Elijah's ascent to heaven in a fiery chariot, which is ophanim in the Hebrew, right, with the aid of a whirlwind, but it was just as final. Enoch was no more. Okay, so that's what it kind of mentions, right? And then it talks about, let me continue on. I'm just turning to the next page here. It says, Enoch was a descendant of Adam, of the seventh generation of the patriarchs by way of Seth. He was the father of the long-lived Methuselah, and was taken by God at age 365 years, and that is all. Okay, so that's basically what we have access to from the 66 book canon, right? And two other biblical references add very little. In Ecclesiasticus, the uniqueness of his translation is stressed, and in the Epistle of Jude, Enoch becomes a prophet, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. For anything else on this enigmatic, apocalyptic, and undoubtedly mythical prophet, we must turn to the books that bear his name, such as the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch in all of its forms is consigned to the pseudepigrapha, those texts ascribed to exalted persons rather than to their true authors, who are usually unknown, and which have been excluded from the canon of the Old and New Testaments. It was not always so. In the earliest Christian centuries, the Book of Enoch was held in great reverence by many of the church fathers, including Irenaeus, Origen, and Tertullian. Even Jerome, who generally disapproved of the work, looked upon Enoch as being one of the two witnesses in Revelation, who ascended up to heaven in a cloud. By the end of the 4th century, however, the Book of Enoch was looked upon as heretical and was condemned by the Orthodox. So actually, the early church did not condemn the Book of Enoch. Its survival as a complete text was due to a different attitude on the part of Ethiopian Christians. For the most part, they were and still are monophysite in belief. For example, holding the doctrine that the person of the incarnate Christ is of a holy divine nature. The messianic figure in the Book of Enoch was thus quite amiable to them, and by the 5th century, the book had been translated into Ethiopic and had entered the canon of their church. The original text was in a Semitic language, most probably a combination of Hebrew and Aramaic, which was later translated into Greek. Early manuscript versions in all three languages, varying from fragments to subsequent parts of the text, have been found, but manuscripts of the Ethiopic translation are by far the most complete. They are, however, of a much later date. None are earlier than the 15th century, and the possibility of textual corruption has required detailed analysis of the text and careful collation with the earlier versions. This has produced some surprising discoveries, the most startling of which is the significant influence that the Book of Enoch has had upon the text of the New Testament. The Book of Enoch dates from the 2nd and 1st centuries before Christ, and its messianic content was utilized extensively in both the Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles, notably in the titles of the Messiah, Christ, the Anointed One, the Righteous One, the Elect One, and the Son of Man. In two places, the last of these titles is in the context of what are virtually verbatim quotes from the Book of Enoch. But Enoch had vanished from mainstream Christianity by 500 AD, and it would be almost 1,300 years later before the book returned, and scholars could once again appreciate its importance. So I found that to be so very, very interesting. Okay. So also in this introduction, they write, just one more little brief thing here I'd like to read to you. The Ethiopic Book of Enoch is a complete text described by Black as being like an intricately devised jigsaw puzzle, or rather a collection of such puzzles. It begins with an apocalyptic prophecy about the Great Judgment, which is followed by a brief account of the order and harmony of nature. The next section contains the most famous element of the text, the legend of the 200 Watchers. These were from the highest ranks of angels, but they had descended to earth, taught forbidden knowledge to mankind, and mated illicitly with human women. And I do have an extensive Bible study that shows parallels between the 66 book canon scriptures, particularly in Genesis 6, but also in the New Testament, that speak to the accuracy of the Book of Enoch with that. Continuing on, their offspring were the giants, Nephilim, from whose souls issued demons. Enoch attempts without success to intercede on behalf of the fallen angels, but his plea is rejected and he is shown their future fate. Following this comes a long and detailed description of Enoch's journeys to the four quarters of the earth and the heavens. These eschatological parables, they're really discourses, fill the next section dealing with the future judgment, angelology, the Messiah, and the rewards and punishments of the righteous and the wicked. After these, Enoch is instructed in astronomical and calendrical mysteries, which he imparts to Methuselah during a miraculous descent to earth and reascent to paradise. The book continues with Enoch's prophetic dream visions, covering the period of history from the flood through the Exodus, the building of the temple, its subsequent destruction, and the exile down to the Maccabean revolt and the last judgment. The text concludes with Enoch's admonition to his children, the remarkable apocalypse of weeks in which the events of the 10 last world weeks are unfolded, and a series of warnings to sinners and reassurances to the righteous. The Ethiopic Enoch is not a simplistic text, but if we wrestle with the text to draw out esoteric doctrines, we would do well to remember that in its essence, it contains a stark moral message. For all, the Book of Enoch contains no real suggestion of man's predestination. Human free will is assumed, and salvation can be obtained by choosing righteousness, which is exemplified in the Son of Man. Only the righteous will attain the light. The choice is yours. So I just wanted to read that to you because it kind of summarized like all the enormous amount of research that I have gathered while trying to figure out what scholars are saying about the validity of this Book of Enoch. I do, as I mentioned, believe that it is divinely inspired, and I can't wait to share something with you. One of the many interesting topics of the Book of Enoch actually expands upon what took place, as I mentioned, in Genesis chapter 6 between the Watchers and humankind, which kind of was summarized in what I have read. Okay? And as I mentioned also, the playlist that I created kind of unpacks it, and in order for those of us who have been who have grown up in organized religion, we really need to take our time going through the scriptures, because sometimes our minds are filled with a lot of information that is very, very invalid, in my opinion. Now, one very interesting component to that understanding is linked to the book of Daniel. And once I heard this perspective, I was so fascinated, because you know what? For many, many years, whilst in organized religion, I would actually attend these Bible study series, and they would go on for, I think, almost 2 weeks, right? If my memory serves me correctly. They would be these annual Daniel and Revelation seminars. That's what they were called, Daniel and Revelation seminars. And I would, really try to pay attention, and I would take pages and pages of notes every year and read through the scriptures along with the writings of their so-called prophet, always never fully understanding what they were saying. It never would sort of connect. I could never sort of put the pieces together without, just making assumptions that what they were saying was true, but I never sort of could cognitively understand it. I mean, it never made sense to me. I could never wrap my mind around their explanations. So I just went to these seminars year after year, because I was, a member of this organized religion, hoping that someday it would all make sense, right? And honestly, I am actually just so humbled and grateful to the Most High Creator God for protecting me from being brainwashed during those times. Because when I say years, I mean years and years and years. Because I literally spent hours upon hours combing through the doctrines of that religion and that false prophet. But I have learned that on this journey, if it doesn't make sense, if it's too complicated, it's probably heresy. And absolutely 100% not true. God's word is simple, and when it falls into place, it really does fall into place. So the Book of Enoch, for me, on my journey, fills in many gaps when it comes to understanding both prophecy and end time events. And one of them being tied to the book of Daniel, as I mentioned, which many biblical scholars agree correlates to Genesis chapter 6 and what is transpiring, on this earth right now. So I thought that, just to answer some of the questions that I've been emailed about, I don't want to go into the Book of Enoch study that I did previously, but I thought that what I could do is I could literally highlight and show the correlation between Genesis chapter 6 and Daniel, I believe it's chapter 2. Yeah, so it's going to be a Bible study about Genesis chapter 2, Genesis chapter 6, and Daniel chapter 2, and it will correlate and explain a lot of things that the Book of Enoch explains. And it's so important that we as believers are not fearful and study to show ourselves approved. And so in my next Bible study, I will sort of unpack these scriptures. It's going to take a little while because we have to read through all of them to understand what's going on. But I can give you a little teaser. Genesis chapter 2 talks about the serpent's seed, right? And so I'm going to unpack that using the Hebrew, and I'm going to correlate it to Genesis chapter 6 and the Book of Enoch, speaking about the watchers, the Nephilim, the fallen angels. And then we're going to talk about the statue in Daniel chapter 2. So that's going to be my next study. So I just wanted to read that little mini sort of historical introduction to you about the Book of Enoch. I have mentioned all of this previously. I think it was back in 2020, if my mind serves me correctly. I do believe this book is an inspired book. And I think that a lot of organized religions say that it's not inspired, because actually some of the books of Enoch can be very dangerous. Not that they're not true, but that they speak to information that we should not dabble in as believers, as followers of the Most High Creator God. That information can be dangerous, magic and witchcraft and things of that nature. But this book, right, this book really does give us insight to what's going on in the spiritual realm. And why do we need to know that as believers? We need to know and understand that because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. And as the world, as the atmosphere in this world on this earth changes, we need to empower ourselves with the word of the Most High Creator God. And we also need to understand prophecy so we know what to expect, so we do not operate from a place of fear, right? Because the Most High Creator God had not given us a spirit of fear. So I do want to encourage you to join me next week as I correlate those 3 to 4 scriptures and unpack them. It may be a little bit of a longer video, and I do encourage you to look into the Book of Enoch, of course, with prayer, asking the Most High to guide you and send His Spirit of truth who guides into all truth, the Ruach HaKodesh, to open up your eyes to the things that a lot of organized religion try to hide from us. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. I do also want to encourage you to engage in your own personal research. Don't take what I say as the end-all be-all truth. Delve into your own research and look into it. And I promise you that the Most High Creator God will not lead you astray. I also want to remind you that the Most High Creator God of the universe loves His children.